Hey folks, this is Tony and welcome to some more game dev. Today we're going to be taking a look at some ambient sound effect work that I've been wanting to do. And if we have some time, jumping into some kind of systems around toggling the shadow casting of some props, which I'll explain more when we get to that part. But the main thing I want to look at is this ambient sound effects. So I want to try and come up with a system in which if the player walks forward, they should just be getting kind of the general background noise. In general, what we're currently hearing, I think, is what we're going to be using for most of this kind of woods area. But once we get close enough to the river, I'd like to start having a bit of a kind of river rushing sound start to enter, like to ramp up in volume as we get closer to the river. And then as we get over to this waterfall, I'd like to have more of a waterfall sound effect also start to play. So the way I'm thinking about building this is I'd like to have it set up such that we can set, how do I want to put this? I want to have essentially a ambient sound effects game object. And then under this, I would like to be able to create empty game objects, which will be like river sound effect. And this river sound effect, we will give a gizmo icon of maybe this orange. That might be too close to our transition points. What are some other colors? We have yellow. Could use a teal. Could also just use a gray color. Gray color might be fine for now. So we have this kind of like gizmo that I want to be able to place in different spots. So for the river sound effects, I'm probably going to want a bunch of these because it's not going to be one spot. It's going to be pretty much everywhere where there is a river tile. And I could potentially make it so that the river tiles themselves give this information, but I'd like to start with it being fully controllable by these tokens and see how that works. So for these river sound effects, I would want to do something like this, which does feel a bit cumbersome to have to create so many of these objects, but at the same time, it also gives me the most control. So if we want to create other sound effects or other ambience, we can do that completely without having to like integrate it directly into, say, the type of tile it is. And this gives me more flexibility in the long run. So we can place a bunch of these here, and I would want each of these to have some sort of a component that's going to say whether or not it has, well, I guess the component needs to have information about what ambient sound effect should be playing here, and we might come up with more metadata as we get it functional. But let's start with the idea of just like, we walk up, and if we're in range of this tile, it starts playing the ambient sound effect. And if we're ever out of range of a river sound effect, then it will stop playing. I guess it'll fade down to 0. Okay, that seems reasonable. Let's do something I don't do enough of. We're gonna come in here. We're gonna make a new wireframe. If I can remember how. Let's go to one of the existing ones. Like pickup items might be a good one. This ranged attack one is pretty straightforward. Let's steal this. Let's rename this ambient sound effects. And then let's break down how this is going to work. So we're going to have a class which is going to be ambient sound effects marker, and this is going to basically contain the audio ID for the sound effect we're going to want to play, and this will be placed on a tile in the map. we're going to need to take that data and we're going to need to import that. So like a lot of other map data, that's going to get sent into our tile datas, which has a bunch of information in it, but for our purposes, we'll ignore everything else it's doing, but we're going to need to create a new list of... Yeah, I guess technically it could be a list, because we might have more than one ambient sound effect tied to a specific area. So we'll have an ambient sound effect data list, which will be ambient sound effects that will be on that tile. Naming convention doesn't really matter here. This is all pseudocode. Just trying to get my head wrapped around it. So we're going to have these ambient sound effect classes, which we'll place in the world. And then when we save the game, it'll get read into our tile datas, and we'll have a list of those ambient sound effects in here. Once we have that list of ambient sound effects, when we actually create the room, we'll probably need to put that into the tile. This is a good question I hadn't actually thought out. See, this is why it's good to kind of do a bit of light documentation here. So where is this going to live in the end? I was thinking about the data side of it, really more so, which is that we're going to need these objects. But when we actually hit play, we're going to need some sort of system to detect where the player is and whether or not it's close to one of these ambient sound effects. I think while that's loading, we're also going to need a ambient ID. And if two of these objects share the same ambient ID, they are the same ambient effect. But when we're walking around here, if we're going to place this object, I think it makes sense to tie it to the tile. So if we look in here under the scenes, environment board, one of these has a tile display, a tile animation, and then tile weapon, which is a bit of dead code at this point. But tile primarily has all the information about what contents is on it. Rather than build this directly in the tile, I think I might do the same thing I've done for some of these other ones and make a new tile class, which can be like tile ambient, which will be in control of checking to see whether or not the player is close enough to this tile to start playing. Okay, let me just... So we're going to have another tile class, which we can call tile ambient sound effect. Or maybe even just tile ambience. Maybe sound effect is still good to specify what this is for. So we'll have a tile ambient class. This will have the ambient ID that we get from the base class that the base data setup. Am I spelling ambient wrong? No, I'm fine. Okay. It just doesn't like the combinations. So it'll have the ambient ID, and then it'll have the audio ID associated with that ambient. These might be the same thing, but we'll see when we get building. And so this will also need some sort of way of checking where the player is. And once it finds, so it'll have some sort of like find player that'll need to be updated every time the player moves. Maybe it's the inverse. Maybe every time the player moves, it will check for tile ambient sound effects within range. And if it finds any, what does it do? Like when we find a tile ambient, is that contacting the audio manager? Because at some point we're going to have to contact the audio manager. Let's take a look at that. So inside of our engine, specifically in the global scene, we have an audio manager, which has references to a whole bunch of sound effects, as well as whether or not we're playing music or sound effects. They have different mixing groups, so you can control them in the settings. But when I play an ambient sound effect, it's kind of more like a music clip. It's less like a sound effect in some regards and more like a music clip that's going to play continuously. Sound effects are more one-off. So we might want to create a separate category. So instead of play sound effect, we have like a play ambient. Does that make sense? So we have play music and we play sound effect. Do we want to have a play ambient? And again, this is for like river sounds, like they're sound effects, but I want to categorize them differently because they're going to be like contextual based off the player's position in the world. So it's less like a attack sound effect where you're just going to play that one off, and more like these are ambient audio that is just going to be active based off the player's position. So if we call play ambient, what happens there? We'll have to play that ambient sound effect. Do we need like a stop ambient, which will turn off that sound effect at a certain point? That's one way we could do it. The other option is, do we need some sort of in-between manager that can be the ambient manager that can keep track of current running ambience? There's something here, but like this makes sense to me that we're going to need to have some object in the scene that'll get saved into our tile data, and then having some sort of tile object that's going to know whether or not this tile has some sort of ambient associated with it, and if the player's close enough, trigger that ambient to play. But it's from this point onwards where I'm less sure. It could be that we go directly from here to one of these, and it could either be from we trigger and say, hey, ambient manager, the player's close enough to this tile, start this ambient ID and play that sound effect. Or and when we say play that sound effect, that'll be the ambient manager contacting the audio manager to start playing it. Or it's going to be the tile ambient sound effect immediately telling the audio manager to start. I guess the thing I can't picture, and the reason why this is confusing, is what is the actual mechanism of triggering this sound effect? Like, who contacts this? Because at some point the player is going to move to a tile. When that player gets moved to a tile, is that move to tile function going to check for sound effects around it? Or does it send a message out that says, hey, I've moved, and then any tile ambient sound effects checks the distance? That's the part I can't picture right now. Is how do these two interact? So let's go take a look. If we go into the unit, which is the player, when this is placed on a tile, this is when it has officially moved to that tile. It is now sitting on that position. It's not going to be specifically any unit, though, because any unit can be placed. So the monsters, when they're moving around, will also call this function. So we need to specifically know if the player has been placed on a tile. The player unit has no information about like, the fact that it is the player, does it? I guess it does have this player state beta, this script, which has kind of been a catch-all for anything player specific, is the location where all the player unique things happen. But this doesn't really have any information on movement. It looks like there is an update movement, but that's not even being used. On movement changed? Oh, at some point this was controlling the player's movement, but this has all been moved out to be part of the screen system, because the screen handles all the inputs, which in turn handles the player as well as any ability performing. So a lot of this is dead code. I actually wonder how much of this remains. I guess the player beta state is mostly being used as a storage point. Find references. Oh, it's not used anywhere. Interesting. It doesn't sound right. Is my IntelliSense broken? It does look to be. Okay, we're gonna close this and reopen. Oh, this is coming from the ability. Okay, maybe it's not broken. Maybe that actually isn't being used. There's similar variables set up inside of the unit, but the player beta state doesn't actually use this value. So this is dead. This is dead. These shouldn't be being used anywhere. Like, what is even... That's not being used anywhere. That's not being used anywhere. I think beyond this init call, I don't think this class does anything or holds much of value. I'd have to go through more closely. But that means that this isn't going to have much information or much power to know that we are the player. Interesting. There's nothing that says that this is the player unit beyond just the fact that we control it? Oh, did I turn off all the props by mistake? Why was none of the props rendering? Yeah, none of those are appearing. We didn't do anything. Did all this data get cleared? What is... Oh man, something is heavily broken. Yeah, a bunch of data is busted. Okay, let's try running forest create props. I think I accidentally, before the stream started, created props on an empty folder, and I think that may have broke some of the props. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Yeah, okay. And then if we hit play, does the props load correctly now? All right, so I had made a mistake at some point. That's not a problem. I need to turn off that debug error. Okay, when we move the player, that's coming from the UI essentially. So if we come into the front end system and we look at combat screens, combat ability select, this is the screen that's controlling the inputs to determine which way we're going. So if we process directional input, we send some information down to the player director, which is going to tell it to have the current unit, which for our cases is only one, but we could have multiple units if we wanted. But for us, we only have the single one, and that single unit is going to get a message telling it to perform this ability, and that ability is the movement, and it comes up with a plan for it and sends it forth. Yeah, and then other things check to see this list of plans, and it does the things. So when we move around. Okay, so the screen says process the directional input, tell the player director to have its current unit move based off of whichever direction we pressed using the movement ability. So the only way that we know that this unit is the player unit is simply because the player director knows that it's the current unit. Which gets added when we initialize the combat state machine, which gets initialized by the dungeon player manager, which creates the player. Okay. But none of this information gets down to the actual unit level. Like, other than the one script that this has on it that says that this is the player state beta, other than this and the fact that it has the entity ID of player, nothing else about it says that it is specifically the player unit. Could the entity be enough for us to check against? That might be good enough. What does a enemy have for its entity information? I assume it's based off of its position in the world. It's not also defaulted to player, right? If we take a look at this enemy, interesting. It doesn't have an entity component? Alright. So by default doesn't have an entity component associated with it. That might be an issue long term, like for other stuff I might want to do with cutscenes. We might want to control specific enemies in like special cutscenes, and having it have an entity could be useful, but for our purposes right now, this is all fine. It means that the player is unique in that it does have that player entity, and nothing else will have this entity component. So if we want to play an ambient sound effect when the player gets close, when we do like a move to tile for that player or place that unit has no information that says, hey, I'm the player and I should be the one updating ambient sound effects. So that means we'd have to not have we can't have the player search for the tiles around it and see if any of them have ambient sound effects. We would instead need the ambient tile sound effects to check if there's a player nearby. But we only really should have to do this on the moment that the player moves. This feels backwards. Like, something about this feels odd. Like, it seems like when the player makes a movement, it should check for sound effects around it. What if I'm coming at this backwards? The player has its own move ability that is unique and special. The AI and the player have different move effects. So instead of trying to figure out at a unit level, is there any sound effects around, we could do something similar to do what we do with the tile sight effect, which determines if there's a tile somewhere near the player, and if it's not revealed, we reveal it. Like, the movement is actually what controls the revealing of tiles. And so if the movement isn't what controls the revealing of tiles, perhaps it should also be the player's movement that also controls any sound effects that we might want to play. Based off the player's position. This is checking one forward, because Y1 is forward in front of the player. This is checking to the left and to the right of the player in front. This is checking 2 in front of the player. This is checking further out on the left and right, -2 and 2. And then this is checking in the center. From the position that the player is on is this 0, 0. And then it checks to the left and the right, and then 2 out from left and right. This is behind the player, 5 tiles, and then 2 tiles. So if we were to go into like a sprite and let's just make a 16 by 16 file. And if we were to come into here, if the player is in the center, it's essentially checking, these are not great colors, it's a checking it's checking that pattern around the player. So whenever the player moves, we try and reveal all the tiles in this pattern around the player. So if we were to take that exact same setup, and instead of having a sight ability effect, we could have a audio effect that would essentially just do potentially the same spots all the way around the outside. This could be all the spots where we want to check for ambient audio. And then every time we move, we could check one further to see if we're no longer in range. But this means that we would be limited to only hearing things. I guess the other thing is we don't have to do it in the same way. these are all movement effects. And this should also probably have the word ability in here. Maybe it doesn't matter. Tile ambient effect? Ambient sound effect? I need to actually set up this class. It's going to complain otherwise. This is handling all the fog stuff. This has some special logic inside of it, but at its core, it's essentially checking a specific tile within a set offset. I think this can do something similar. So whenever we move, we could have a tile ambient sound effect that gets created, and it will create a sequence step that will check a specific tile, and if that tile has a ambient sound effect associated with it, it could trigger it to play. And then so the player move ability would check around it with a tile ambient sound effect. And this would check to see if there is a tile ambient sound effect at that specific location. If there is, I think that it would add that ambient sound effect to an ambient manager. And then we could have another effect on the movement that tells it to update all of its ambience. We'd also need some sort of clear Yeah, this is starting to make some sense. It's a little awkward. But essentially, when the player moves, it would clear all of the ambient sound effects that the ambient manager currently has. But it wouldn't be removing them all. I think it would be flagging them for removal. How do I say this? Set ambient sound effects to be removed. Then the tile ambient sound effect would check to see if there are any tiles around it that have ambience associated with it. If it does, then it would add ambient sound effect, which if that sound effect that was flagged to be removed is then added, it would just not update it or not remove it. And then once we're done trying to find all of the ambient sound effects from our move, then we would have an update ambient sound effect that would tell the ambient manager to remove any that were still flagged as removed, add any new ones, and anything that was flagged for removed and set to be add, just eliminate them and don't worry about it. And when I say update, that's going to be it calling play and stop on the audio manager, which I think is still going to be in control of the actual audio itself. But this thing will be just in control of managing and keeping track of which ambience should and shouldn't be played. I don't love it, but I think it's enough of an idea to build. And then from here, we can find what's working and not working. Okay, let's start constructing. So we're going to need 3 different ambient effects, and we're going to need a new singleton manager. It's possible that that singleton manager could just be built directly into the audio manager, but I think I want to keep them separate for now. Okay, so what is this thing doing? I guess I'm going to keep it simple. I don't like the fact that I have this massive list of effects, each one checking each tile individually, but this does make it the most flexible in that I can control the size and spacing of these. I think I want to do a range. So I'm debating whether or not to leave this structure the same for this ambient system, but I think I just don't want to have this many in this setup. Yes. Okay, got it. I see what I think I see a better way to do this. Ambient sound effect. Tile ambient sound effect. So this thing, instead of doing a offset, is going to need to know about the player. I think we still need the player spawn variant. Yeah, I think we do, but we shouldn't need this value. We shouldn't need the delay, and I don't think we'll need the offset with the way I'm thinking of building this. This all gets removed. And I think what we actually care about is the unit. Which there's an easier way to find that. If we look at other base ability effects, we should be able to find one. Yeah, it's not this straightforward. So this is the way that we normally get the unit. We check the component in parent, and normally this complex move is under the player, but this effect will probably also need to happen when we teleport into areas, which technically happens from the tile triggering the effect. Okay, so the tile the site effect normally just cares about the position. This target.get target tile.position or get component in parent tile.position. For us, we don't care about the tile as much as we care about the unit, which it looks like in this situation we can do target.get unit. For the player spawn variant. But for the non-player spawn variant, I guess we can just use this functionality. Yeah, so in this case, if we have a direction, we know that the parent in the unit in the parent will be the unit we care about. Otherwise, in the player spawning variation, then we care about the target.get unit, which is in this case a tile. I think that makes sense. And then this is going to take in a unit. And nothing else. And then once it has a unit, it's going to need to create a action sequence similar to this, but instead of revealing a tile, yeah, I took away too much. We do need this part still. And this will still get passed in as well. And this action will be contacting the audio manager. Which is going to have a reference to our new ambient manager. Yeah, we need to go create that real quick. Okay. I think it's coming together. So essentially we're going to fire off an effect and it's going to say this unit has moved. And as a part of this move, I would like to update which ambient sound effects we're currently playing. So in here, we're going to create a new sound effect. One file wrong, but ambient sound effect manager. And we are going to maybe this is a controller. The problem is manager often is a singleton in my engine. I'm going to just call this controller for now. I don't know if that's a great way to differentiate it. But we're going to grab this. We're going to place it in here as a public ambient sound effect controller. Ambient sound effect controller. We got to rename it inside of here as well. Okay. I'm not sure where I want to put this, but we're going to do a public void update ambient sound effect. I'm not sure what this is doing yet. Like, we're going to call update ambient sound effects. And I think it passes in the unit. You know, I think I'm just wrong with my setup. I think I was so concerned about getting the player unit. I think I failed to notice the more obvious solution here is that we don't need to pass around the entire unit class, which is massive. Instead, I think we can just use the exact same positional information and I think we update the ambient sound effects based off the position of the player, essentially. So then instead of taking in a unit here, I think this takes in a position. And then in the same way that we use that position to get specific tiles around the player, we'll do the same thing here inside of the ambient controller. Because we'll have to figure out what our offset is. But I think I'm okay with that. We'll have to loop through Yeah, this is possible. Yeah, okay, I got it. So we're gonna put all of this inside of the ambient sound effect controller. This thing is basically gonna just control all of the ambient sound effects, mostly to make the audio manager less messy, because if we have to put all of this in the audio manager, it's just gonna end up having a lot of extra information here. And make this class a lot larger, and so I'm just making a separate one. If I'm understanding, yeah, I think I'm just, if I'm following my own train of thought, I think I'm just setting this up separate from the audio manager to keep things more clean. This is the information we will eventually need in order to find specific tiles from the original position. Yeah, okay, sorry, processing. So I think this is all gonna work. So the main difference here is instead of having 3 different calls inside of the ability effect, what I've basically done is I'm simplifying it down so that there's going to be just one tile ambient effect, which is going to pass the positional information into here, and then all of this logic can be done inside of the ambient manager. Given the position, because with the position it should be able to do all of this. Technically this is calling to the audio manager, which in turn is calling to this, but I'm going to keep it a little simpler. We have broke stuff. That makes sense. We need to actually set up the prefab to have this new script. So this audio manager will have a reference to the ambient sound effect controller, and that will get dragged up into this location here. Okay. And then I want to just see something. When we step forward a tile, this is 2 tiles out from the player. So that means that the position at this point has already moved. No, the move happens down here. Interesting. This is where we actually move to. Oh, because this is the target tile. So this is the position we're trying to move to. Oh, okay, okay, that makes sense. So yeah, so this spot that it's going to give as a position in here will be the spot we are moving towards, or on spawn, the tile we've spawned on. So either way, yeah, that'll work. And then we'll come into here, we'll use that position, and we'll check a number of tiles around and see if any of those tiles contain a tile ambient sound effect. And if it does, then we'll either start up that ambient sound effect or continue to play that ambient sound effect if it was already playing. If an ambient sound effect was not found within range and is currently playing, then we will lower it. Okay, cool. I think I figured it out. I think I got what I'm doing. It took an hour, but we're now off to the races. So now we just got to write a bunch of code. Let's start with the search. So we're going to do a distance search. Sure, thanks, autocomplete. What distance do we want? Honestly, let's stay with 4. And we're going to change this to Y. So we're going to check 4 tiles around us. And in this check, we're going to do a line offset. So this is going to be just a point value. So can we just do a local value called offset, and then offset.x is equal to x, and offset.y is equal to y, and then plus the offset to the target point, and then get this tile. Cool. From there, we're going to need to have the other half set up. So we're kind of setting up in the middle of our original kind of design doc. We're building out, we kind of need to figure out how this was going to work before we finish setting up this. I mean, that's not entirely true. We could have built this first and then figured this part out, but this is the order I went in. So now I want to go back here and I want to do this setup so that we'll actually have a tile ambient sound effect that we can check against right here, essentially, where we're currently coding. So if we take a step back for a bit and come over here and take a look at these river sound effect objects, we're going to make a new component. Where do these live? Dungeon state, NPCs, player, room. Room contains room states. Okay. What about these objects, these props? Where does this live? What's the script's location? Edit and script. I want to see with this location. This lives inside of the grid movement system. Tile metadata. Okay, yes. Interacts, all the other ones, they all live here as well. So we're going to make a new one of these. We need a simple one. All of these are pretty simple. Let's do pathing override tile. That one's like really straightforward. And use that as a reference. So in here, we're going to make a ambient sound effect tile. And this one here is going to contain core tile data. Okay, yeah. So we're going to need a similar data structure here, which will be ambient sound effects data. And ambient sound effect data, I think I might want this to eventually be a list. But let's start with this just being an audio ID. So then here, we just need to rename everything correctly. And then every one of these gray dots is going to get this ambient sound effect. Nope, wrong one. Ambient sound effect tile, which has some data in it, which is going to be the actual sound effect we want to play, which I guess we need to set up. So in here, for the time being, we're just going to make a new sound effect. I want to rebuild this whole thing. This has got some old sound effects that we're not even using anymore. I think I almost want to delete this whole thing and start over. Maybe not fully, but close to it. So we're going to call this ambient sound effects. And we're going to take a look here. Not this section, this sound effects section for ambience. And we're gonna look for environment. And I think river is where we want to start. We'll do river outside. We're just gonna click that. Yeah, seems good. And so we're gonna do this sound and we're gonna do 1_river outside. We're just gonna name it the same as the actual file. Actually, does this still work? What's this folder path location? For like Heroes VO. Oh, it's only 10 sound effects? Oh, see, this is what I'm getting at. I think this is old, and this is what we're actually using. So it's anything under content. So if we just do sound effects / ambiences / environment. Is this system I built smart enough to populate everything? No. If I do /river, that's still not working. Console errors? No feedback whatsoever. Perfect. Great. Very helpful. Let's see. Sound effects, ambiences / environment, river. That is the correct slashes. Only had to go 2 levels deep, but that means that it should be smart enough to know at least the first 2 levels. If we just zero this out for a second and then hit populate, yeah, that doesn't help either. Interesting. Why is it not finding this information? Sound effects? I must be spelling something wrong. So we're just gonna actually grab each one, paste it in, populate from folder. No. More just curious at this point. So this is calling populate. Populate's going through, checking for audio files. It's weird that this is complaining about Unity editor. It should be not grayed out in this situation, but regardless. Just going to try removing it to see if that is the problem. It is. Oh, because I have that backwards, don't I? Yeah, this should be if not. Let's find other examples. No, this is definitely right. It is definitely if Unity editor is the correct setup here. Oh, it's shift_Unity editor. Yeah, so it's a typo. Cool. So then if I get rid of river and then I hit populate, does this populate everything? It only found wind, aka the last one. Oh, okay. So there is still some problems with this system. This is not smart enough to find everything in multiple folder structures. It only finds the last folder structure. It's probably overwriting it every time. Okay. Well, for now, that side kind of tangent, you know, being what it is, I got distracted. I'm sorry. Okay, so river outside is the audio effect that we'd like to play. We've just added that to the audio manager. So now if we come back into here and look at core tile datas, where is this getting used? It gets used in two places. Here in the actual location where it is being set, and then here inside of the actual core tile data where it's being saved out. So we're going to want to do the same thing here, ambient sound effect data, and we're going to want to keep a reference to the data for this tile. And then where is this being set? This is where it's being used. Generate is what we care about. So for our purposes, we're going to loop through, find any children components with ambient sound effect data, and we are going to set the tile data at that location. We're going to set the tile to have this data. Like that. Okay. Now, when we save out our tiles, all of these tiles should have the ambient information saved inside of them, which is tricky to go check, but honestly, I probably should still. This is going to be in our design data section somewhere in here. We're currently in F7, which has 182 tiles. We're looking for like 10-6. That's 11-6. Hey, that should also work. That's this one here, which should have some audio data associated with it now. Ambient sound effects. It is empty. Okay. So this is here. If we just move this slightly. And then hit save again. Go back to F7. It says this is pits. This is the right area, I think. So the data isn't being saved correctly. Interesting. Oh. Oh, there was still a typo here. And I didn't notice the console error that was probably happening. Alright, try this again. So we're gonna move this slightly, save, F7. There it is. Okay. So that is now being updated. So certain tiles, not all tiles, but certain tiles will now have audio ambient effects set. So if we look at the first one here, this one here, which is position 5.3, which is up here, does not have any ambience associated with it. So yeah, so these ones now have the river sound effect added. Nothing else does. And then we want to look at inside of the tile, when we load it, pathing overrides used in this way, we're going to want to have something inside of the tile load reference another script and store this data. maybe, I don't know, it's debatable, but it's maybe fine to just put this information directly in the tile instead of making another subclass. Thanks, Amorphous. Appreciate the stop by, and as always, appreciate the tier 3. I hope you have a good day at work. Sorry, trying to think. I think that I just want to, for the time being, store this audio data directly in the tile, because I can't think of much more beyond just storing the data that it's going to need to do. The reason that we broke like tile animation into its own class is because it does like a ton of processing of the revealing, but this just needs to basically just store the ambient sound effect. Yeah. Which I don't even think we need to like do anything with. We can just like literally just do ambient sound effect data and store it here. And then when we load up the tile data, we can just do our ambient sound effect data is equal to the tile data's version. And that should just get the information in a spot where we can actually check it. So then that kind of completes this half where we're going from ambient sound effect to it being in our tile data to the tile actually having it. Right now we don't have two different pieces. We only have the audio ID, but I'm just going to see if we can get the sound effect playing, and then we'll kind of dig deeper later. So then I also think it's possible that audio ID and ambient ID might be the same thing for our purposes. I don't know. I'm just going to keep building. So now that we have this here, we need to go back to the ambient controller, checking the tile. So I guess technically it works like this now. The player moves. We get a tile ambient sound effect that says, hey, I'm moving to this position. It tells the ambient sound effect controller. The ambient sound effect controller is then going to check for all tiles within a specific range. If any of them have an ambient audio ID associated with them, it's going to then update and try and play that effect. Yes. So then if we go back to ambient sound effect. Oh, where are we? We went too far. I've lost the thing I'm looking for. Let's go back to Unity to find it. Unity Audio Manager. Or maybe even just ambient sound effect controller. That's what we're looking for. So now we're going to get the tile, and from the tile we can get the ambient sound effect data. And this will have the audio ID. If this audio ID string dot is null or empty, and yeah, so if it's not null or empty, then there's values here. And to get a very rudimentary version of this up and running, we're just going to say audio manager.instance.play sound effect, and we're going to play this as a sound effect. Yeah. Okay. It needs to be way more complicated than this eventually, but we're gonna turn on the game audio and we're gonna see if we can hear the river start playing when we get within 4 tiles. Oh, it failed. Interesting. This is implying that in some situations that data is not set. That doesn't seem right, though. It should be set to something. I guess maybe that's possible. So we can add a if this is not equal to null and its string is not empty, then play a sound effect. Or is the tile null? Oh, that could be possible. It could be that we're checking for the position of a tile that doesn't exist. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that makes more sense. So we need to make sure that the tile does not equal null. I'll leave the other check here as well. So if the tile that we were trying to find is not null, and if it has ambient sound effect data, and its ambient sound effect data audio ID is not empty, then play it. So every time the player moves, it'll try and find any ambient sound effects and play them. Yeah, so this isn't going to work long term because this is going to queue up a ton of these. We need the system to be a fair bit smarter. Okay, so we're hearing some river sound effects. A little odd that we had to get that close. I would have thought that we would have checked. Oh, this needs to be like -3 to 3 because we want to check in all directions around us, not just in one facing, essentially. What is that shape, actually? Because when it's 0, 0, that'll be at the middle. So if we're going to check in all tile directions, just erase some of this here. If the player is here, and we're going to check in all directions, we're going to... If we're checking 1, 2, 3 directions out, assuming that one value is 0, and then we're going out in the other direction like -3. So this is -3 on this side out to 3. We're doing that at the bare minimum. And then on the other side, we're also going to do this pattern. I think this is just a square. Yeah, because if we're at -3, +3 on the Y, we'll check here. Yeah, so we're just checking a box right now in all directions. It's possible I might want to simplify this logic so it's more of like a circle, similar to our site. But I think this is going to be something I'm going to have to figure out just from playing. I'm hearing the water now. So the water tile would be 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So I think it's hearing this one. But as we get closer, it's just going to get louder and louder because we're just continuously playing more versions of it every time we get closer to another tile. So instead, we're going to need a system to determine whether or not that effect is currently playing. So let's make a list of audio IDs. Ambient audio IDs. Okay, and then from these ambient audio IDs, we're going to not play it immediately, but we're instead going to add the audio ID to this list. If it doesn't contain it already. Okay. we actually want to have a new list as well. So we're going to have a list of new ambient audio IDs, which we're going to add. I'm going to need this in a second. We're going to add all of these ones to the new list. And then after we've added all the new ones, we're then going to loop through all of those new IDs. And we're going to check if our ambient IDs have any of those new ones. Forgot to turn off notifications. Okay, so we're going to check to see if this does not contain it, in which case we're going to add it. This is basically the same thing I was doing up above. I lost my train of thought. There's a reason I was setting this up. It's because we need to clear anything. Okay, how do I do this? I need to somehow know which audio effects that were in the list are no longer added. Maybe the better way to call this is not new ambient, but current ambient audio effects. And then we want to validate. We want to do the inverse. We want to do if current audio effects contains an ID that was already in our ambient audio IDs, then we want to remove that ID from. This becomes new again in this situation. Okay, sorry, I'm going back and forth. But basically, we're going to say these are new audio effects. We're going to look through our existing ones, and if our existing audio effects contains this ID, then this is no longer new. No, it's still not. Okay. What we're trying to achieve is we want to have a list of old ambient audio effects. These are the to remove. These are the ones we want to get rid of. And that list is going to be essentially the ambient audio IDs minus the new ones. I think current is a better name for this, because this is at this moment, the moment we receive this position, and then we loop through and find all of these. These are the ones that are active. These are the ones that are current, but they're also the ones that are new. I don't know why this is breaking my brain. Because this is going to contain a set of IDs that are both potentially the ones that are active, as well as potentially a set of IDs that are no longer in range. And if they are no longer in range, they should be removed. is that right? If the ambient audio IDs, if we loop through every single one of the ones we had, if it's not contained in our current IDs, then it should be removed. And then ambient audio IDs gets equal to the current audio IDs after that. And then for the list of removes, we then need to loop through those and we need to audio manager instance dot play sound effect. We need to do stop. Oh, I see how it works. Yeah, we kind of need a new play call. So play music has a set of audio sources, and whenever we call play music, we instantly remove the old music as part of playing the new one. But we don't really have a way of stopping a sound effect like we want to do with this ambient. So I think we do need some new calls in the audio manager for handling this system. Okay, but regardless, we'll have some sort of stop call here that will be stop ambient, and then we'll give it the ID that we want it to stop. But we're also going to want to start some new audio effects as well. We're going to also need to have a list of play ambient sound effects, which is going to need to be looping through all the current ones. And if ambient sound effects does not contain that current ID, this becomes the new ambient audio effects. Yeah, so I think this is a overkill way of doing this, but it's also the most clearly written, but it uses way more data than I think it needs to. Yeah, okay, I see. So now that I've written this out, I think it makes more sense to me. So what we need to be doing is, instead of removing or adding anything in here, this is where we're doing these calls. So this is the new, this is where we're playing. This is to remove, this is the stop. So if we loop through the ambient audio IDs and the current audio IDs doesn't contain one that was one of the ones we were playing, then we tell it to stop. If we loop through the current ones and the ones that we had before does not contain one of the current ones, then we tell it to play. And then we get to eliminate 2 lists and a bunch more for loops. Okay, cool. And then at the very end, we set the ambient audio IDs to whatever the current is. Maybe this can become existing or previous. Does that make more sense? So if the current ambient IDs doesn't contain a previous, then we stop it. Specifically the previous. And then if the ambient IDs does not contain a current, if the previous ambient IDs does not contain one of the current ones, we tell it to play the current one. Okay. Cool. So then we need to go into the audio manager. And the audio manager is going to need a different way of handling this information. So if we go look at the actual prefab, audio manager, this has a list of it has two object pools. It has an audio object pool that creates some music audio sources, and it has a pool that creates some sound effects sources. I think we want another version that is going to create ambient audio sources. I'm going to base that off music because it's going to be closer to that. Nope, still failed. Ambient audio source. Nope, still failed. There we go. Now we spelled it correctly. So we're going to make ambient audio sources. Under the audio manager, we're going to create another game object pool, add game object pool, and this one will create these ambient audio sources with the same ID name, and I think we'll make 8 should be more than enough. And then the audio manager, how does it play music? Like, when do we also might want a different volume for this. I'll probably how does that get set? Is that just here? Yeah, this just uses music. So for now we can just change this to use sound effects. Yeah, and these are set to looping, which is what we want, because we're going to want to loop the sound effect until it's over. Okay. So inside of the audio manager, wherever we're doing play, music, we're going to copy this as a base. We're going to do play ambient. And then this is going to do a ambient audio data for the rename ambient ID. Okay. Should have done a rename on this one. That's fine. Okay, and then from this setup, this used to we want to do the same thing here, I think. We want to have a why do we not have one of these for sound? Oh, because we don't need to hold on to it. Okay, yeah. So we do want the same setup. So we're going to do ambient audio sources because we're going to need to hold on to the ambient audio sources to control them. Oh, this one's less sophisticated though. The music used to just say if we already have an ambient audio source, or sorry, an audio source for the music, then there's music playing and we leave. For us, we're going to actually need to validate way more information. So instead of get first, we're going to need to do a get. Our audio pool system, I don't even think has a get call. Maybe it's this try get. Is this hooked up correctly? Oh, it's based off the data. Okay, I'm gonna move on past this because this is gonna be requiring me to remember how some of this stuff works first. So just ignore all previous music stuff. Let's just get it to actually the point where it's going to try and trigger the source to play. So if we get rid of all of this other logic, it's just going to simply look up. Oh, we're in the wrong spot. I got lost. So I think we want to still do that. I'm going to undo a little further. Yeah, this is in the right spot. Okay, I see what I did wrong. When I went up and made the ambient version, I went back down and started modifying the wrong function. Okay, so inside of here, we're going to just comment all this out for now. Comment all this out for now. Cool. And this is just going to say play ambient with this ID. It's going to try and get this ambient audio data. We're going to use the ambient audio sources. Interesting. This one's using the game object pool manager. I think this setup we're doing out here is unnecessary. Because this is setting up a script that should be using the game object pool manager. This system is creating a local version of a pooling in script. So I don't think we even need the external stuff we just set up. But how does this know how many objects to pool? Interesting. When this does this add... Oh, this does the internal call. Oh man, it's been a while since I've looked at this system. Okay, so we do need the system that we set up here on the script. And it will need this ID. But the list is essentially keeping track of all of the sources that we create when we do this add. We can just replace music to ambient with all of these files just for clarity. And this just plays that and it'll loop forever. So the trick is we need some version of a stop ambient. Okay. And that's this part in here then. Yes. Okay. Okay, I see how this is set up. I'm on board. So what I need to do is, given a ambient audio ID, I will need to do a ambient audio sources. But instead of doing it this way, I can do the try get, and I can pass in audio data as the thing we're trying to get against. So if we do this, then we can get out pooled object. Can I find other locations where I've done this? Only on dialogue entries. And it would be done like this. Pooled object, ambient. No, it's not even on that. The pooled data here is technically audio data, is the generic. Ambient audio source. Okay. So this is going to see if we can try and get out a audio source that is playing that ambient. If we succeed, let's do it the other way. If we find nothing, we will return immediately and just say no ambient playing. You know what? Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to actually log that as an error. Log debug.log error failed to find ambient sound effect. Give it the ambient sound effect ID. And then return. How do I say this? Failed to find the ambient sound effect while failed to stop ambient ID this. I was going to say not found, but honestly, that's probably fine. Okay, so once we have this, though, this should be the ambient source we want to stop. So how did we stop the music? We would do a fade. Okay, so I think we want to do something similar here. So we want to set up a sequence on the ambient audio source. That's this call. So we need to do this. No, that's not right either. It should be this value. Okay. So the ambient audio source. I guess I could add previous so that the naming convention is similar across these functions. Previous ambient source does not equal null. Then we need to get the previous music. What was that in this context? That was this value. Okay. Which is the previous ambient audio source. Get its audio source. This becomes previous ambient. We fade audio on that object down to 0 over half a second. Here is where we are doing a fade up, which we don't need to do in this situation because we're not switching between two pieces. We're just stopping this audio. And then here, if previous ambient source, then we want to do a remove. I don't know why this had to be a function. This can just be this dot remove. Sure, okay. I think that should work. So if we call stop, we're going to try and find the ambient audio. Once we find it, then, or if we don't find it, we'll leave. Otherwise, if we find it, then we'll get the audio source associated with this object. We'll fade it down to 0 over half a second. We want that to be blocking in this case. What's the default? Default is true, so we can just remove this to make it cleaner. So we're going to leave it as blocking. We don't need two versions of this. We can just do it this way. In fact, in this situation, we're already past this point. We don't need this if check. If this try get failed, this if check would already say that it's null. So this just becomes simplified down to this for our version. The reason that we need all that if check normally for music is that there may not be a piece of music already playing. It's also interesting that with the play music call, there's no way to like stop music. So I can't actually like go to silence if I wanted to have like a moment without audio. I can only swap between two pieces of music. Yeah, so that should do it though. Stop will now create a sequence which will fade it down and then remove it. The only thing that's a little weird about this is that okay, so there is a bit of oddity. Technically speaking, this ambient ID would still be found inside of this audio sources until half a second later. So if we're moving faster than half a second, we might get this stop call multiple times, depending on speed. What's the player's current movement speed? If I just come over here, I'm gonna just open the hero animation. Yeah, okay. And then if we look at the movement, which is somewhere in this massive list of animations, walk. Walk is currently 280. So I think if we make this 0.2 for this fade on ambience, that should be fast enough that you shouldn't be able to, well, honestly 2.5 would just be quick enough that this should finish before you're able to move again. Okay, sure. So then if we come back over here, Audio Manager should now have a play call and a stop call. And so if we come back to Unity and we walk up to the river should start playing a sound effect as we get close. And the moment that we walk away, it should stop. Let's take a look at the Audio Manager. I'm not hearing a river sound effect. There is an ambient sound effect. It is currently set to volume 1. Okay, I'm gonna guess if we take a look here, sound effects, these are set to volume 0.1. These are set to volume 0 by default. So the volume of a music piece is based off of that music's audio data. If we look at a sound effect, does that sound effect get its audio set to, yeah, it gets its volume set. And because we don't need to do that immediately for audio effects, it was kind of a bad copy. Or we missed some of it. We need to also set up this with this. Sure. Let's say that's good. So we just... Music doesn't need its audio set at that point. It needs it set later during the sequence as the other one's fading down. But for a sound effect, we want it to turn on immediately. So now we have some river here. We are seeing some errors. That's just this one. I'm going to comment that out for now. I will figure that out later. And I'm just going to restart with that change. But I think that is working. It's just the fade is almost a little too harsh. So there is a bit of a fade down. It is only a quarter of a second, so it's not a lot. And the start is immediate, so there is no fade up. So I guess I could see a world in which we might want to do some amount of fade up on ambience, because right now we're just setting it immediately, but we could do a sequence step to increase the volume over time. So instead of doing all of this logic, it's just going to be a sequence step that's going to take the ambient audio source and the ambient audio data's volume, and then fade this audio source up to this volume over, let's say, a quarter of a second. So now we should have a little bit of fade up as we walk towards, and a little bit of fade down as we walk away. It's hard to tell. Let's try increasing that a little bit to like half a second, which could cause problems, but I just need to check whether it's working first. It's hard to tell. It feels like it's almost instant. Yeah, that's the problem. It helps if I actually don't set the audio immediately now. I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm hearing the fade more on the fade down, but the step in is still instant. And I'm like, it's because I didn't fix the code. All right, so much better. So then in theory, that's all working. We could then set up a different effect on the waterfall potentially. It's a little hard to see behind the waterfall, but that should be... Oh. Turn off ISO so that we're actually in perspective mode. Yeah, those are positioned on the waterfall tiles. And then for both of these, we can name these waterfall sound effects. And then we need to set up a new sound effect for the waterfall, which I believe we have. Audio manager, ambient sound effects. Instead of pointing to this river, waterfall, waterfall outside, 1_waterfall outside. Cool. Oh, river. Not hearing the waterfall unless it's very similar. Audio. Yeah, there's only one ambient playing. Did I not hit save, maybe? Feels like I hit save. Oh, I never actually hooked up the IDs to be different here. I hooked up the audio manager to have the ID, but I did not hook up these ambient effect tiles to have a different ID. Yeah, there's some bugs. It just broke. Interesting. I was hearing audio cut in and out a bit. Yeah, it's super mad about some stuff. We managed to get 3 versions of River playing, which means our logic to control the ambience so that there's not more than one playing at a time broke. Yeah. I'm not sure how, but by moving around too quickly, we got into a bad state. I'm going to guess that has to do with having too long of a fade time and you being able to move quicker than the fade. But it's also possible there's just a bug in my logic that's allowing multiple sound effects to play. This is fine. We're at the 2-hour limit. We try and stream from 2 to 4 on Sundays, take a 2-hour break for dinner, and then come back from 6 to 8. So oh, here's a good example, actually. We are out of range of that waterfall, but I'm definitely still hearing the waterfall sound effect. Yeah, so somehow we got into a situation where we managed to move away from the waterfall, but it is still playing. So it's definitely a bug in this logic somehow. Or more specifically, probably something about this that I didn't write correctly. Okay, either way, as I was saying, we're kind of at time. We're going to take a break for dinner. We'll be back at 6. We will continue to kind of figure out what the bugs are, as well as one thing I would like to try and solve is potentially a distance factor. So figuring out what the distance is from where the player is standing, aka our initial position, and the distance to the nearest ambient effect. And if the ambient effect is close, we're going to find the closest ambient effect, and from that ambient effect, we will adjust the volume based off distance. So if there is a river sound effect within a tile of the player, then we'll play at full volume. If it's like 2 tiles away, then we will play at like half volume, and if it's 3 tiles away, we'll play at like 25%. That way, as we walk up to things, we'll also get to hear the river volume kind of ramp up. I'm sure that'll only cause more bugs. So we'll start by just getting... We're generating 5 different ambient effects. There are 4 different rivers that get set to play when we step forward. Okay, yeah, there's definitely a bug with our logic somehow. Regardless, yeah, we'll come back. We'll fix the bug with the multiple ambient audios playing simultaneously. We'll try and add a volume ramp system so that based off of the distance to the tile that has that ambient effect, we will scale the volume so that it'll get louder as we get closer, and it'll get softer as we walk away from it, so it won't be as heavy of a change. And then we have some other work I'd like to try and do around controlling some props shadows, which we'll get to that next stream. So taking a break for dinner. I will be back in 2 hours. Thanks everyone for hanging out, and for now this will be Tolhi signing out. Later, folks.